Beneath the noise of official history, there are corridors no light has touched, where dust clings to locked steel doors and the air carries the weight of unspoken crimes. Here, the past is not dead. It waits, sealed in crates, whispered through intercepted signals, etched in the margins of vanished reports. Every fragment we uncover drags us closer to the moment when secrecy becomes a weapon, and the truth itself becomes something too dangerous to name. On the night of February 11th, 1945, the Oder River was frozen solid. The Soviet First Ukrainian Front had broken through at Breslau, and German High Command was moving anything of value west before the Red Army could seize it. That evening, a heavily guarded Deutsche Reichsbahn freight convoy departed Görlitz under the innocuous designation Sonderzug 77 Hull. In internal Heereswaffenamt correspondence, however, it bore a different name: Edelweiss. Official manifests. List 14 covered wagons, 3 tank cars, and a command coach attached to a Class 52 locomotive. The wagons were recorded as containing industrial materials for reallocation, but an intercepted Enigma transmission, decrypted at Bletchley Park on February 13th, hinted at something else. Transport Edelweiss, priority, category Schwarz, avoid rail nodes, no inspection. Cargo sensitive, atmospheric control required. Category Schwarz was a designation reserved for weapons prototypes or intelligence assets of the highest secrecy. The convoy's route was meant to bypass Dresden, cutting southwest toward Reichenberg, then crossing into the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. But according to Reichsbahn traffic records, the train passed the junction at Hirschberg shortly after 0200 on February 12th and was never seen again. Post-war Soviet archives, declassified briefly in 1991 before being reclassified in 1994, contain a report from Major Ivan K. Melnikov of the 8th Guards Tank Corps. His unit had been tasked with intercepting Edelweiss after receiving intelligence from a foreign liaison, believed to be an NKVD officer embedded with Tito's partisans. Melnikov's report describes finding a derailment site in the Ora Mountains near Johanngeorgenstadt. Railway torn, blast origin below grade, no bodies, 1 wagon ruptured, severe heat damage, metallic residue fused to ballast. Photographs, attached to the file, grainy, underexposed, show twisted steel beams and what appear to be fragments of pressure vessels. One image is marked with a handwritten note in blue pencil: Schiffer 74B, reactor. Cipher 74B, reactor. Theories about what Edelweiss carried have multiplied over the decades. Some point to the Heereswaffenamt's America Bomber program, which envisioned a long-range aircraft capable of striking the US mainland, possibly with unconventional payloads. Others believe the cargo related to Projekt, Germany's atomic research effort. Supporting this is an Allied interrogation transcript from March 1945, in which captured scientist Dr. Ernst Wirtz mentioned a mobile apparatus designed to be relocated ahead of advancing enemy forces. One unexplained thread emerged in 1968 when a Czech railway worker named Karel Novak told the newspaper Rude Pravo that his father, employed as a trackman in 1945, had been ordered to help dismantle rail lines in the Ore Mountains. He claimed soldiers spoke of a sealed tunnel beneath the trackbed, into which an entire train was shunted before being walled up. The article was quickly withdrawn, and Novak reportedly lost his job the following week. In 1983, a West German amateur historian named Dieter Kranz launched a private search. Using pre-war geological surveys, Kranz identified several abandoned silver mines in the area that could accommodate a train-length cavity. His team discovered a concrete bulkhead deep inside the Gruber Hoffnung mine, poured over rusted rails. Attempts to breach it failed. Within months, East German border guards confiscated Kranz's equipment and expelled him from the GDR. One particularly troubling piece of evidence lies in a 1946 US Counterintelligence Corps (CIC) memo, classified Top Secret No Foreign Dissemination, and released under WWII in 2005. The memo references Operation Harvest, a post-war joint mission with the Soviets to locate lost Category Schwarz assets. Under a section marked Edelweiss, it reads, Asset, neutralized in situ, potential contamination hazard, recommend indefinite site denial. The memo provides no details on the nature of the contamination. If the Soviets recovered anything from the site, it never appeared in their known weapons programs, at least not in forms recognizable to Western intelligence. Yet in May 1946, Soviet engineers began construction of a heavily guarded facility near Ozersk in the Urals, later identified as the Mayak nuclear complex. Whether material from Edelweiss contributed to that effort remains speculation. The most haunting testimony comes from an unnamed Czech forestry worker, recorded on reel-to-reel tape in 1961 by an East German Stasi officer. The worker described hearing a low hum from beneath the forest floor for several nights in early 1945, followed by a sound like metal tearing. Weeks later, Soviet soldiers were seen in the area wearing unusual protective gear. But the kanji tape ends abruptly after the man says, "What they buried was not dead." Today, the route of Edelweiss lies partly within Czech hiking trails, its railbeds reclaimed by forest. Official German railway archives maintain that no such train existed. The surviving Soviet file is sealed under national security classification until 2045. Until then, the truth of what left Görlitz that freezing February night, and where it now rests, remains locked in shadow. In March 1952, Flight Lieutenant James Harrington of the British Special Intelligence Service was assigned to a seemingly routine inspection of abandoned Luftwaffe sites along Germany's Baltic coast. The Cold War was tightening, and Peenemünde, once the nerve center of the Reich's missile program, remained a potential source of sensitive materials. What Harrington discovered there would be stamped "most secret" and buried in Ministry of Defense files for more than half a century. Officially, the Peenemünde West airfield had been bombed into obsolescence by the RAF in August 1943. Allied intelligence believed that any remaining installations were either dismantled or stripped bare by the Soviets in the immediate post-war years. Yet when Harrington arrived, accompanied by 2 Royal Engineers, they found the cracked concrete runway concealing more than just weeds and debris. Near the northern taxiway, a partially collapsed maintenance shed revealed a concealed steel hatch, leading to a stairwell, its walls lined with moisture-stained tiles. Descending into the darkness, the men discovered a tunnel system running beneath the airfield, reinforced concrete corridors, some wide enough for vehicle passage, others choked with rusting equipment. Faded stenciling on the walls read, "Zugang bitte Chaos" and "Nicht öffnen ohne Genehmigung des Kommandanten." Inside a locked storage room, they found several wooden crates, each branded with a trident insignia and the codename Projekt Nereus. The crates contained dismantled turbine assemblies, oddly compact in design, along with watertight control housings. More unusual were the film canisters, 35mm nitrate reels labelled Versuchsreihe 644, Stralsund. When projected later in London under secure conditions, the footage showed grainy black and white images of what appeared to be small rockets, not launched from pads, but from submerged cylindrical housings in a calm body of water. Several sequences depicted the devices breaking the surface and igniting mid-air, accelerating away at shallow angles. A technical assessment by the Royal Aircraft Establishment concluded that the turbines were not standard aircraft jet units, but modified to operate in oxygen-deprived environments, possibly as part of an underwater launch system. This aligned disturbingly with a fragmentary German naval report recovered in Kiel in 1946, which described combined marine air deployment for extended strike reach under the same Nereus codename. Within days, the discovery was swept under the umbrella of Operation Sea Glass, a joint UK-US intelligence effort to capture advanced Axis technology. All materials were crated and flown to RAF Rawton before disappearing into the secure stores of the Ministry of Supply. Harrington's orders forbade any further mention of the find. The Soviet reaction to the incident, if they were aware, remains unclear. But in 1954, a Royal Navy monitoring station in the Hebrides intercepted anomalous radio traffic on a frequency range known to be used by Soviet submarine forces. The transmission contained strings of numbers interspersed with the word Nereus. Analysts could not determine whether the reference was coincidental or deliberate. By the 1960s, Projekt Nereus was a rumor circulating among defense contractors, an alleged Nazi attempt to develop a launch platform for long-range missiles hidden in coastal waters, capable of striking without warning. Critics dismissed it as implausible, citing the logistical difficulties of such a system during wartime. Yet the archival evidence, what little escaped classification, suggests otherwise. A debriefing transcript from April 1952 records an interview with Dr. Otto Gessner, a captured propulsion engineer, who insisted that the Führer wanted his Vergeltungswaffen to rise from anywhere, land, sea, or air. Nereus was the sea. In Say, 1979, Harrington, by then retired and living in Sussex, was approached by a journalist researching Peenemunde's lesser-known projects. Harrington refused to speak on the record, but hinted that what we found could have altered naval warfare. For decades, within a year, the journalist's notes were seized under the UK's Official Secrets Act, and his planned article never appeared. It wasn't until 2007, when a tranche of Cold War files was mistakenly released to the National Archives, that Nereus resurfaced. The documents included a faded blueprint showing a towed submersible barge with 2 vertical launch tubes, labelled Sea Platform C. Handwritten in the margin, tested 3X, Baltic, all successes. Despite renewed interest from historians, the MOD has neither confirmed nor denied that any Nereus hardware still exists. Independent divers who have attempted to search the Baltic near Stralsund report that several known wrecks in the area are now under active naval restriction zones. The tunnels beneath Peenemünde were sealed in 1953 and later demolished during East German redevelopment of the site. No physical trace of the trident-marked crates remains. For some, Projekt Nereus is just another thread in the tapestry of unrealized German wonder weapons. For others, it is a reminder that the line between discarded experiment and revolutionary weapon is often measured not in years, but in who finds it first. At 23:40 on April 9, 1944, a twin-engine C-47 Dakota belonging to the Royal Air Force's 267 Squadron crossed the Ligurian coast under heavy cloud cover. On board were 12 operatives, 7 from Britain's Special Operations Executive, 5 from the US Office of Strategic Services, tasked with executing a joint sabotage mission in German-occupied northern Italy. The mission's codename was Iron Dagger. Its objective, according to fragmentary SOE orders, was to neutralize a German communications hub believed to be coordinating troop movements between Milan and the Gothic Line. The drop zone was a small plateau northeast of Lecco, chosen for its relative isolation and its proximity to partisan safehouses. The aircraft returned to its base in Brindisi without incident, reporting the successful deployment of all personnel and their equipment. That was the last confirmed contact with Iron Dagger. Post-war accounts from local resistance fighters contradict one another. Some claimed the operatives never made contact. Others insisted the team passed through the town of Belano the following night, heavily armed but without their radio sets. In 1946, a debriefed partisan named Carlo Bianchi told Allied interrogators that the operatives went up the lake road toward Como after receiving a message from a trusted Italian guide. Bianchi's testimony was filed, then quietly buried in OSS archives. In 1978, when certain CIA records were declassified, Iron Dagger reappeared in an unexpected context. A briefing prepared for the Director of Central Intelligence referenced a newly uncovered German Abwehr decrypt from April 12, 1944, which spoke of enemy agents compromised by unorthodox countermeasures at Villa Quattro Venti. The villa, located on the western shore of Lake Como, had been requisitioned by the SS Ahnenerbe, ostensibly for archaeological preservation work. No such work is documented. The most chilling evidence comes from a set of photographs included in the 1978 release, originally classified as Geheime Reichssache, state secret. The images show dimly lit rooms with tiled walls, surgical tables fitted with leather restraints, and a collection of glass cylinders connected by narrow tubing to steel tanks. On the walls, the emblem of the SS Ahnenerbe, oak leaves encircling a swastika, appears in stencil form. In one photo, a clipboard on the wall bears the heading Versuchspersonen, April 44, Test Subjects, April 44. The CIA briefing notes that the photographs were obtained from a foreign liaison partner, almost certainly Italian, military intelligence, sometime in 1946. By then, Villa Quattroventi had been destroyed in a fire officially attributed to partisan sabotage. No records survive of the building's original blueprints or ownership prior to its seizure by the SS Dr. Franz Hartmann, an SS physician captured in Innsbruck in May 1945, admitted under interrogation to having conducted medical trials on Allied prisoners in northern Italy, but denied any connection to the villa. He died in US custody in 1947 before further questioning could be arranged. The few documents tying him to the Ahnenerbe's Italian operations vanished from the National Archives in 1953 under circumstances still unexplained. In 1989, an Italian investigative journalist named Luca Bernardi claimed to have located a surviving witness, an elderly groundskeeper's son who as a boy had been employed at the villa. Bernardi's interview notes, later published in a small-run book, describe the witness's memory of 12 men brought in, their hands tied, their faces covered in hoods, and a terrible smell like burned hair that lingered for days after a loud electrical noise from the lower floors. Shortly after the book's release, Bernardi died in a car accident on the A8 motorway. No human remains definitively linked to Iron Dagger have ever been recovered. In 2001, construction workers excavating a hillside near the villa's supposed location uncovered rusted metal cases containing US-manufactured demolition charges, their fuses missing. Italian authorities sealed the site, citing unexploded ordnance hazards, and no further public excavation has occurred. Official SOE and OSS histories make no mention of the operation, and its personnel are memorialized only under generic missing in action entries. For decades, families of the operatives were told they vanished behind enemy lines, likely killed in combat, but the classified files paint a different picture, one of deliberate erasure, of a mission compromised not by bad luck or enemy fire, but by something so politically and morally damaging that it could not be acknowledged even in victory. What remains of Iron Dagger exists only in the shadows of conflicting testimonies, missing files, and blurred photographs of rooms no one wants to admit ever existed. Whatever happened inside Villa Quattroventi during those days in April 1944 was not a conventional act of war, it was something else entirely. Something that both Axis and Allied intelligence agreed should never be spoken of again. In the immediate aftermath of Japan's surrender in August 1945, the United States military moved quickly to secure critical Japanese military research before Soviet forces could seize it. One such effort, buried deep in post-war records under the codename Operation Paper Lantern, targeted facilities in Japanese-occupied Manchuria. Officially, the mission aimed to gather technical documents and materiel of strategic value. In reality, it was a race against time to capture whatever remained of Imperial Army Unit 731's research before it fell into Soviet hands. The lead element of Paper Lantern, a composite team from the US 1st Cavalry Division and a detachment of Technical Air Intelligence Unit personnel, departed from the port of Dalian on August 19, 1945, traveling overland toward a suspected satellite site near the industrial city of Chikiha. Accompanying them were two civilian interpreters, both former members of the Office of Strategic Services, tasked with identifying scientific personnel and translating captured files. 3 days into the mission, the team reached the outskirts of an abandoned railway yard. There, concealed behind a barricade of sandbags and sheet metal, they discovered a concealed access shaft descending into what appeared to be an underground laboratory complex. The entrance was marked with a rusting, steel plaque bearing only 3 symbols: a red circle, a stylized snowflake, and a black hazard glyph resembling crossed bones. Inside, the facility, later designated 731B in US after-action reports, contained rows of cryogenic chambers, each connected to a network of insulated piping. Several drums stood in a corner, their exteriors painted with chemical warning symbols, unfamiliar to Allied personnel. One drum had been breached, its lid pried back. The air inside the chamber was so cold that the breath of the soldiers crystallized in front of their faces. The team's log entries, declassified in 1989 but heavily redacted, described the presence of organic matter in containment and suspension fluids of unknown composition. No photographs from inside the chambers survive in accessible archives, though one partially declassified negative shows a technician's gloved hand holding a glass ampule containing a murky, pale liquid. A penciled annotation on the negative. Sleeve reads, "Keep frozen." That night, a detachment of trucks arrived at the facility, 3 US Army vehicles, followed by 2 requisitioned Japanese lorries driven by local auxiliaries. Witness statements collected in the 1960s indicate that sealed metallic containers were loaded under armed guard. The convoy departed north toward the Korean border. No movement logs or convoy rosters for those vehicles exist in surviving US Army Transportation Corps records. When Soviet units reached the Chikiha site in early September, they found the facility stripped bare. A translated NKVD field report, unearthed in the 1990s, notes that the Americans removed all refrigeration units and most chemical stockpiles, and that remaining equipment was sabotaged beyond repair. The same report claims traces of a cryogenic pathogen preservation system were present, though no further technical description is provided. The official US mission file for Paper Lantern ends abruptly, stamped sealed by Executive Order 1947. Notably, the only surviving American casualty list for the mission includes 2 names not found in any other military service record, raising the possibility that non-military specialists participated under assumed identities. Requests for further information, filed under the Freedom of Information Act, have been repeatedly denied on grounds of national security. In 1950, during the Korean War, a classified internal memo circulated within the US Army Chemical Corps. It warned of possible deployment by enemy forces of biological agents with cryogenic storage origin, and referenced lessons learned from Manchurian recoveries, 1945. The term paper lantern is used only once in the document, but its inclusion was enough to spark speculation among later historians that some of the recovered material, or knowledge derived from it, had found its way into Cold War weapons programs. A fragment of the story resurfaced unexpectedly in 1971, when an American journalist covering thawing US-China relations interviewed an elderly Chinese railway worker in Harbin. The man recalled being conscripted to help unload American army crates in the summer of 1945 from trucks arriving from Chikiha. He described the crates as freezing cold, even in the heat, and swore he heard a faint humming from inside one of them. His account was never published. The journalist's tapes were confiscated by military police during a stopover at Yokota Air Base. Today, the site of 731B lies under an unmarked field outside Chikiha, with no memorial or historical marker acknowledging what took place there. All official inquiries into Operation Paper Lantern have ended in the same conclusion: records incomplete, details unavailable, further disclosure impossible. What was retrieved from that underground complex, and where it ultimately went, remains, locked behind the same walls of secrecy that have concealed it for 8 decades. In the tense final days of October 1962, as the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, a sealed file was removed from the Pentagon's restricted archives under direct order from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The file bore the title Projekt Heimdall, a name originating in German documents captured in May 1945 and kept classified ever since. The file contained schematics, encrypted transmission logs, and a list of coordinates, most of them in remote, inhospitable regions of the world. According to post-war intelligence assessments, Heimdall referred to a global network of high-frequency radio beacons covertly deployed by the Third Reich between 1943 and 1945. Ostensibly, these devices were experimental navigation aids for U-boat wolfpacks operating far from European waters, but a more secretive layer of documentation suggested a different purpose. If the Reich collapsed, the beacons would transmit activation codes to concealed weapons caches and sleeper units, ensuring a form of delayed retaliation decades after the war's end. For years after the war, Allied intelligence assumed the network had been dismantled. However, in September 1962, an NSA listening station in Puerto Rico intercepted a series of faint, repeating signals on a narrowband frequency once associated with Kriegsmarine communications. Analysts noted an unusual pattern: bursts of Morse, code interspersed with two-digit numerals, followed by a distinct carrier tone identical to one found in wartime German beacon tests. The origin was triangulated to two locations, one in the Patagonian interior of Argentina and one deep in Egypt's Western Desert. The Pentagon's concern was immediate. If the signals were genuine, they could indicate operational Nazi-era systems still capable of activating unknown assets. A joint CIA-NSA task force was formed under the cover name Field Team Orion. On October 27, 1962, at the height of the standoff in Cuba, the Patagonian team was deployed by helicopter from a Chilean forward base. According to a declassified fragment of their mission log, they located a derelict stone hut, partially collapsed against a cliff face. Beneath it was a steel-lined shaft descending nearly 30 meters, leading to a small chamber containing a tripod-mounted transmitter. The equipment bore Kriegsmarine markings, yet its core components appeared to have been replaced in the 1950s with far more modern electronics. The unit was active, powered by a bank of lead-acid batteries connected to a concealed wind turbine on the ridge above. The Western Desert team reported a similar find: a buried concrete vault with an antenna disguised as a rusting telegraph pole. Inside, the beacon sat atop a steel rack bolted to the floor, transmitting on the same schedule as its Patagonian counterpart. In both cases, the teams were ordered to dismantle the units immediately, but according to one CIA after-action cable, final disablement delayed due to retrieval of internal components for further analysis. What those components were remains redacted in all surviving copies. Then, on November 3, 1962, 3 days after the crisis ended, both beacons ceased transmissions simultaneously. No explanation is given in the surviving operational summaries. Internal memoranda from December 1962 indicate that no further Heimdall transmissions detected on any monitored frequencies. Yet one memo, handwritten and unsigned, warns: this cessation may indicate completion of function, not abandonment. By the mid-1970s, the story of Heimdall had all but disappeared from intelligence briefings. Most of the captured wartime, files were returned to deep storage, and the few surviving field operatives involved in Orion retired or were reassigned. An attempt by a Senate Intelligence Subcommittee in 1981 to subpoena documents on Heimdall was met with a formal statement that no such program exists. In 1998, a Freedom of Information Act request inadvertently revealed a single surviving photograph from the Patagonian site, grainy, underexposed, showing a cylindrical transmitter the size of a small oil drum, its surface etched with both serial numbers and an unfamiliar 4-rune insignia. Handwritten in the photo's margin were the words, "Still transmitting on arrival." What purpose these beacons ultimately served, whether as fail-safes for dormant weapon caches, triggers for long-forgotten sabotage plans, or something more obscure, has never been clarified. With the original German architects long dead and the surviving American files stripped to the point of uselessness, Project Heimdall remains one of the few remaining threads connecting the Second World War to the hidden undercurrents of the Cold War. And while official monitoring ceased decades ago, amateur radio operators in Argentina and Egypt occasionally report catching a faint, rhythmic signal, Morse interspersed with numerals, identical to the 1962 intercepts. Official channels dismiss these as atmospheric anomalies. Those who have studied Heimdall for years are not so certain. The trail ends where the archives fall silent, where the last document is torn away, and all that remains is the sense of something watching from the dark. You feel it in the pause before the lights flicker back on, in the hum of a signal no one admits exists. History has not forgotten. It's only been hiding, waiting for the moment it decides to surface again.